The term force in vocal expression means much more than plain volume. Forceful speech also has energy and emotion behind it. Volume, of course, is an important part of the force technique, but without feeling an energy behind what you say, volume adds very little to the overall effect. Here's an example of a simple increase in volume. It has just been announced in Washington that the U.S. Air Force has launched an American astronaut into orbit around the moon. You undoubtedly guessed that this increase in volume was caused by turning up the volume control while I was talking. Much the same effect can be achieved by a volume increase done with the voice alone. It has just been announced in Washington that the U.S. Air Force has launched an American astronaut into orbit around the moon. In both cases, all I did was increase the loudness of the sound. To add force to what I'm saying, I have to add emotion and energy. The degree of each will depend on the circumstances. Supposing I were an official of the U.S. government addressing a crowd of eagerly expectant people, waiting breathlessly for word of the success or failure of the launching. In addition to volume, I would superimpose the elements of energy and emotion, and it might sound something like this. It has just been announced in Washington that the U.S. Air Force has launched an American astronaut into orbit around the moon. You can see that by adding energy and emotion, the effect is dynamic and forceful. Force adds life and vitality to what we say. The degrees of force that you can apply are actually very broad, but for our purposes, let's assume that there are 3 levels of intensity. Light force has energy and emotion, but not a great deal of volume. Medium force contains energy and emotion, and a medium level of volume. Full force is used to express intense feeling. It has a high level of all 3 elements. Let's examine these 3 types of force in action. Obviously, in any type of forceful speech, they may overlap each other. This is only natural, as speech is a flexible and changing medium of expression. The example I'll use is a speech that was made by Woodrow Wilson, the former President of the United States. The First World War was over, and Mr. Wilson was frantically touring the country trying to win support of the voters for America's participation in the League of Nations. But there was strong opposition to Wilson's League of Nations. Even the U.S. Congress was aligned against him. When he made this speech, he was filled with emotion in a last desperate effort to save his great cause. The passages with light force we'll leave unmarked. We'll underline once for medium force and twice for full force. My fellow citizens, I feel like asking the Secretary of War to get the boys who went across the water to fight together on some field where I could go and see them. And I would stand up before them and say, "Boys, I told you before you went across the seas to fight that this was a war against wars. And I did my best to fulfill that promise. But I am obliged to come to you in mortification and shame and say I've been unable to fulfill that promise. You are betrayed. You fought for something you did not get. And the glory of the armies and the navies of the United States is gone like a dream in the night. And there ensues upon it, in the suitable darkness of the night, the nightmare of dread which lay upon the nations before this war came. And there will come some time, in the vengeful providence of God, another struggle, in which not a few 100,000 fine young men from America will have to die, but as many millions as are necessary to accomplish the final freedom of the peoples of the world." If you'll check the markings of Wilson's speech, you'll see that the first few lines were delivered with light force. There was feeling behind the words, a feeling bordering on reverence, along with a feeling of dignity. This was completely fitting when he was talking about getting all the boys together again on one field where he could talk to them. We approach this part with very little volume. There's increased intensity in the next two sentences when Wilson imagines what he would say to them if he had the opportunity. There's a definite increase in emotion and volume, but it's not extreme at this point. This is medium force. Full force is called for when he hits his first emotional peak, mentioning the war against wars, and saying that he's obliged to come to them with mortification and shame. These are powerful thoughts and must be expressed accordingly. He stays at this peak of intensity through the reference to the U.S. Army and Navy. From there on, we notice a contrast between medium force and full force, until he reaches a powerful climax when he talks of the millions of Americans who may be called upon to die in the future. Let's review our definitions again, and then apply the three kinds of force to three different program introductions. Light force has energy and emotion, but a lower level of volume. It would fit an introduction of this kind. The Good Life Hour. True stories of man's pursuit of peace of mind. Today's dramatic story is about Jacob Brett, a young college student, and his courageous struggle with a strange, paralyzing disease. Medium force has energy and emotion and a medium amount of volume. It would be more fitting for this type of introduction. KBC brings you News Panorama with Jack Douglas, a comprehensive summary of the day's news, what it means to the nation, and what it means to you. Full force has an extreme amount of energy and emotion and a high level of volume. Full force would probably fit this kind of announcement. Manhunt. From the files of the nation's police bureau come thrilling stories of men against the law. Stay tuned for another exciting tale of America's underworld on Manhunt. Now, no two people would say anything exactly the same way, so there's no exact rule that you can apply to the use of force. This is something you have to learn to play by ear. With some people, a good deal of force comes naturally to their speech. But with others who may be more retiring or conservative, it may be a little more difficult to master the technique of force. As with all other vocal skills, the way to master the use of force is through constant practice. In singing, our voices jump quickly from one note to another. In speech, our voices glide up and down the scale of pitch. The bending of the voice that carries us from one pitch to another is called intonation, or the melody of speech. Intonation and stress are very closely related. The important words in a sentence, the words that carry the most meaning, are usually lifted well above the normal level of pitch. Changes in intonation produce changes in meaning. Let's take a simple sentence as an example and shift the intonation from one word to another and see what happens to the meaning. The sentence is, I told her not to go there. Let's shift each word in sequence above the normal level of pitch and see what happens to the meaning. I told her not to go there. 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 This is a demonstration of intonation at its simplest. Obviously, the right use of intonation not only helps to make our meaning clear, but it also adds color and variety to our voices. As the ideas behind what we're saying become more complex, the pattern of intonation naturally gets a little more complicated. Our definition of intonation is the overall melody of speech. Inflection is the bending of pitch on single words. In considering inflection, we're mainly concerned with the effect on words that end phrases or sentences. Basically, there are three kinds of inflections: a rising inflection, a falling inflection, and the circumflex inflection. The rising inflection indicates either that the thought is tentative or incomplete, or that the speaker is asking a question. Here are some examples. I think I'll go to Chicago, New York, Cleveland. Well, obviously, the speaker not only has not planned his itinerary, but we're left with some doubt that he really will go to the places he mentioned. Let's make him definite by using a falling inflection. I think I'll go to Chicago, New York, and Cleveland. Here's another example of the incompleteness suggested by the rising inflection. I was thinking I would go. There's a fair amount of doubt whether the speaker will go or not. The rising inflection can be used as a connective between ideas. Here are a couple of examples. After I go to the store and put the car in the garage, I'm going to shovel the sidewalk. Although she has graduated from high school and has some specialized training, I don't think she's ready for the job. You'll notice that until the main thought is finished, the qualifying clauses call for the rising inflection, conveying that the thought is incomplete. Of course, the most obvious use of the rising inflection is to ask questions. Are you going? Are you staying? Will you please open the door? However, when the question begins with a question word, such as when, where, how, what, or which, any question that can't be answered with a simple yes or no calls for a downward inflection. When are you coming home? Where have you been? How did it happen? What did she say? Which do you think is best? Remember that rule of inflection. When a question begins with a question word, the downward or falling inflection is always used. The third kind of bend in pitch is called the circumflex inflection. It's a double bend on the same word. Did you say no? It's usually used to indicate emotional reaction of some kind. Pleasure, surprise, disgust, and so on. Here are some examples of the circumflex inflection, and the real meaning behind the words becomes almost self-explanatory. Did you say you were out till 1 o'clock? Are you getting ready to leave? Nice. How well do you know him? Oh, yes. I'm sure she will. One of the best exercises for developing intonation and inflection is to read children's stories. The children won't mind a bit if you lay it on a little. This sort of practice will go a long way toward developing variety in your pitch, intonation, and inflection. Some types of commercial announcing call for a great deal of animation, and that means lots of variety in your inflection and intonation. To give you an idea of how intonation affects commercial announcing, here's a typical example of a spot announcement that requires lots of inflection. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Yes, folks, hurry down right now to the friendly Black and White store in your district and get in on the savings offered at Black and White's early summer value event, now in full swing. You'll find a wonderful selection of needed summer items, all at way, way below regular prices. You'll find such items as lawn coasters for outdoor entertaining, boys' colorful Hawaiian sport shirts at only 59 cents, nylon tires for Dad's car for holiday traveling, and many, many other items too numerous to mention. Be sure, too, to inquire about the exceptional $130 trade-in allowance offered on a big 13-cubic-foot two-door refrigerator freezer. Yes, see them all today at the friendly Black and White store in your district. The use of inflection and intonation is another subject on which it's difficult to be arbitrary. Too little inflection results in monotony, and too much can be extremely wearing on a listener. The proper use of inflection is a matter of ear training and judgment. Most inflectional problems result from talking at listeners rather than to them. If you imagine your listener as being on the other side of the microphone and concentrate on communicating ideas rather than reading words, most inflectional problems will magically disappear. National Institute of Broadcasting, lesson number 11, broadening your pitch range. The normal voice has a pitch range of almost 2 octaves. In the musical scale, 1 octave is made up of 8 notes. The singer works at broadening his pitch range, and this is just as necessary for the announcer. Pitch variations keep the announcer's delivery alive and interesting. You can change the pitch of your voice by changing the amount of tension on the vocal cords, much the same as with a string instrument. Ear training is the most important factor. You must think the change of pitch before you make it. The rest takes place automatically. The pitch at which you habitually talk may not necessarily be your most effective or desirable pitch. If your habitual pitch is too high or too low, your pitch variations will be impeded, and your speech will tend to become monotonous. It will also put an undue strain on your vocal cords. It can lead to unnatural huskiness or shrillness. First, you should make a test to determine your habitual pitch level. The easiest way is to use a pitch pipe or the scale on a piano. Read a paragraph aloud in a conversational way, and listen for the note that appears most often in your speech. To make this demonstration as clear as possible, I'll deliberately assume a pitch level somewhat higher than my own best pitch, and pretend that it represents my habitual pitch, the one I used most in everyday conversation. Here's our sample paragraph. The natural pitch of your voice is determined by the length of your vocal cords. Men's voices are lower than women's because their vocal cords are considerably longer. It is actually possible to broaden your range of pitch by working on the extreme end of your range, either high or low. It's important not to force your voice when you're working on pitch. Always treat your vocal equipment gently. The note of pitch that seemed to be most predominant throughout my reading was this one. That's the note that showed up most often. The optimum pitch, remember, is the one at which your voice sounds its fullest and best. A quick way to find your optimum pitch is to hold your ears and close off the sound, and hum up and down the musical scale. When you find the note that sounds the strongest and fullest in your head, you've found your optimum pitch. There are other methods of finding your optimum pitch. Another good way is to hum up the scale as high as you comfortably can, and then down the scale to the lowest comfortable note. Your best pitch will probably be about 1/3 below the halfway mark. If your optimum pitch differs from your habitual pitch, you have some work ahead of you. What you must do now is learn to replace your habitual pitch with the one at which you sound the best. There are several ways you can do this. Mostly it's a matter of ear training and thinking the pitch level before you use it. Do lots of humming on your best pitch level. Pick tunes where this note or pitch appears frequently. Read sentences and paragraphs in a monotone on your optimum pitch. Here's an example. This country cannot prosper unless business prospers. This country cannot meet its obligations, its tax obligations and all the rest, unless business is doing well. Business will not do well, and you will not have full employment unless they feel that there's a chance to make a profit. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that you try to say everything within the range of a couple of notes. The idea is to use your optimum pitch as the base. This will enable you to move comfortably up and down the pitch range from that base. Pitch changes mean variety and heightened interest in what we say. Let's read that last paragraph again using normal changes of pitch. This country cannot prosper unless business prospers. This country cannot meet its obligations, its tax obligations and all the rest, unless business is doing well. Business will not do well, and you will not have full employment unless they feel that there's a chance to make a profit. Unlike singing, where the voice jumps abruptly from one note to another, the speaking voice glides easily up and down the scale. As with inflection and intonation, children's stories can be wonderful vehicles for practicing the use of a wide range of pitch. Pitch has a tremendous bearing on the mood and interpretation of what we say. It helps to stress some ideas and to minimize others. Good pitch variation gets increased attention from our listener and heightens his interest in what we're saying. It adds overall variety to our speech and helps keep it alive and interesting. National Institute of Broadcasting, lesson number 12, phrasing. In our everyday conversation, most of us have very little trouble with phrasing or talking in groups of ideas. We think of something and we say it. We may hesitate or pause while we collect our thoughts, but once we've clarified the idea of what we want to say in our minds, we generally find it fairly easy to communicate that idea to others. For some strange reason, it's more difficult when the words are written down. Often it seems that the paper has mastered the speaker, instead of the speaker treating the words on paper as symbols of thought. Countless times I've seen radio directors take the script away from a beginning actor and ask him to repeat the idea behind a line in the script. After focusing his mind subjectively on what he was saying and concentrating on the ideas rather than the words, the neophyte would almost always present the thought in a natural way. But all too often, as soon as the script was back in his hand, he began reading words again rather than interpreting ideas. Many people find it difficult to group words into units of thought in a natural way and to present them one at a time. It doesn't matter what you call it, lifting it off the paper, reading for ideas, or phrasing. The idea is the same. Find the ideas in the script and present them one at a time. If you jumble them together or pause in the wrong places, the listener will be unable to follow you. When it's all over, he has nothing to refer to. It's gone forever. As a demonstration of what not to do, let's read our sample script the wrong way. I'll forget about ideas and pause anywhere at all. The preachers sometimes fail to measure up to the pulpit demands of their congregations. It's often because the organization, church, demands so much else of them. Ministers would like to follow Harry Emerson Fosdick's rule of thumb for sermon preparation. 1 hour in the study for each minute in the pulpit. Well, with this kind of phrasing or idea grouping, a speaker would sound ridiculous. More important, nobody would know what he was talking about. Let's take the same paragraph and read it for ideas. If preachers sometimes fail to measure up to the pulpit demands of their congregations, it is often because the organization church demands so much else of them. Ministers would like to follow Harry Emerson Fosdick's rule of thumb for sermon preparation. 1 hour in the study for each minute in the pulpit. There are no absolute rules about phrasing or idea grouping. This is bound to vary with the individual. Some speakers will separate every single idea in a text and still sound effective. Others will deliver longer groups of thought with fewer pauses. Within broad terms, though, common sense will usually dictate the preferred way to phrase almost anything. First of all, let's forget all about formal punctuation. These literary symbols are intended as a guide to the reading eye. When it comes to vocal expression, you can throw away the rule book. As you can see, I've subdivided the text into 36 separate ideas. You may have done it slightly differently, and if it makes good sense, that's your privilege. As I said, there is no hard and fast rule. I'll tap my pencil between each idea, but otherwise I'll read it at a normal rate. Let's see if the whole thing sounds logical. If preachers sometimes fail to measure up to the pulpit demands of their congregations, it is often because the organization church demands so much else of them. Ministers would like to follow Harry Emerson Fosdick's rule of thumb for sermon preparation. 1 hour in the study for each minute in the pulpit, but few of them can find the time. To Dr. Samuel Miller, Dean of Harvard's Divinity School, congregations seem to want everything. Big operator, good manager, preacher, fundraiser, teenage advisor, moderator of the Old Ladies Guild, and in the South they want, if possible, a veteran of the Confederate Army under 30 years of age. Even when he can find the time for some sort of minimal preparation, many a young minister finds himself inadequately trained in homiletics, the art of the pulpit. Since congregations want ministers who are everything from theologian to thaumaturge, seminaries place proportionately less emphasis on preaching skill than they used to. Students themselves often become so interested in the intellectual challenge of new theologies, psychology, and pastoral sociology that they lose sight of the need to communicate these insights. They have the feeling, says Dr. Ralph Stockman, 72, retired pastor of Manhattan's Methodist Christ Church, that preaching doesn't affect lives. If they can help a man overcome a mental twist, they feel they are doing something. It's worth repeating that while I wound up with 36 phrases in my analysis of the script, you may have had 38 or 39. No two people phrase exactly the same way. The important thing is that you group the words into ideas and make sure they're understandable to your listener.